can I also ask for a volunteer? We would like to make a kind of formal record of what we are discussing, so it would be useful to also have some summary notes. Can I ask for a volunteer to take some brief notes of what we're discussing today? I would do it myself, but I am terrible at multitasking, so I cannot share and do notes at the same time. Any volunteers? I shall add that this will be a regular thing, as in it would be useful to have notes each time, but I won't pick on the same person each time. So if you do put your hand up and say you'd like to take notes this time, then you are exempt forevermore.
John, I'm happy to take notes here, and I kind of do for most of them anyway. So I'm not very good at it, but I'm happy to do it.
Fantastic. Not very good notes are better than no notes. So thank you, Matt, and we shall rotate around next time. So thank you for volunteering. The final thing that I wanted to mention was we have been starting to compile a database of different research methods that people have been using, because there's only so many that we can cover in these sessions themselves. What we have put together so far, or what Louise has put together, is this spreadsheet, which, can people see my screen now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. So it just goes through and says name of the tool or the method, what's the purpose, what type of method is it, what type of data is collected, and how many people have been involved in implementation so far, where it's been implemented, who's implemented it, and a link to any kind of related document. So what we're thinking of doing is putting this up as a collaborative document onto the OneDrive, which we can share with people in this group. And we can also have a folder that people can put in, for example, the cooking diaries we've implemented before in Kenya, Zambia, Tanzania, Myanmar. We're also now currently implementing it in Tanzania on mini grids. There's some documents relating to protocols, the reports, etc. If we can put them all together in one folder, then someone else who wants to have a go at implementing cooking diaries can have a look at what's already been done and then build upon that. They can also then contact the people that have implemented before and have a discussion about how best to move forward. Some of that is happening already on the MECS website, but there are also some other documents which aren't currently there and probably won't ever be there. The more kind of half-baked documents, if you will, the ones that are actually, in some senses, most useful for someone who's actually going to implement that themselves. So can I just get a kind of show of hands or a opinion from people as to whether you think this is a useful approach, and if so, something you may be willing to contribute to yourself?
Hi, this is Elisa Puzzolo from Liverpool University. I believe this is a very useful approach because we want to promote consistency across the different countries in study design, also thinking for future publications. And so if we adopt similar methods, particularly for the cooking diaries and other approaches, I think that will be very beneficial. And I'm going to lead a cooking diary study in Cameroon. Cameroon is one of the new partner countries to MECS. So the more we can learn from others, the better it is. But we have already put together the protocol and submitted the protocol for ethical approvals to the Cameroonian National Ethics Body. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Elisa. And I think it probably was your questioning to Louise that prompted the assembly of this spreadsheet. So thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Nigel here. I noticed you put a sort of a contacts column at the end of the spreadsheet. I think that's quite helpful, just because I think I encourage folk within the MECS team just to get in touch, because as you said, there may well be other documents or helpful tips that are not published that we can help each other with, and also it's another way of just making sure we all know what each other are doing.
Totally agree. Anybody else want to chime in on whether this is a useful idea, and if so, I think the opinions we've had so far are quite positive. Anyone else got anything like that to say before we pass over to Will? Okay, we'll leave it there for now then. I will send around the link as follow-up to this call. And I think it's something that we can discuss the exact structure of, perhaps continuing by email at the start of the next session as well. Yeah, I'll send the details, and without further ado, let me pass over to Will.
Thanks, John. So I'm just going to, so you can all see me. I hopefully got my camera on. Hello. So I'm calling from sunny Edinburgh today, and I'm going to talk about the household survey that we did as part of our market assessment for MECS in Malawi. I mean, a quick summary. Basically, I'm just going to talk through the survey that we did, with particularly focusing on the cooking diaries, kind of what I called an indicative cooking diary. So we didn't do full cooking diaries in Malawi, but we tried to use a survey approach to gather similar information, because as a lot of us know, cooking diaries are very difficult to implement, particularly for large sample sizes, and we're trying to simulate that kind of data through using a survey tool. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see. I think John already shared this. Is that working?
Yeah, it should have been attached to the response I made to the calendar invite. Did everyone manage to get the copy of the handout that I sent around by email?
Yes.
Okay. I'll also put it in the chat just in case anyone did not get it.
Okay, is that working? I don't think I'm clicking the share screen button, but nothing seems to be happening.
Yeah, not working.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, because I'm actually I'm pressing the share screen button, but absolutely nothing is actually happening. I don't know why. John,
So, John, you mentioned that you are going to share it on the chat, yes?
Yeah. Is this Elliot, by the way?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I missed you on the intros before. So this is Elliot from PowerGen in Tanzania. I will share it on the chat, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
John, do you think you can share your screen, seeing as we know it actually works? Because
I just have to pull it up. So if you want to start with an intro, and then I'll put it on the chat and share my screen at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, John. So the survey that we did was based on a few different surveys, partly on the registration survey for the cooking diaries, which is already available to everyone, and some other surveys that we've done at the University of Strathclyde on energy access. And the survey was designed to be used with Kobo Collect, which I'm sure quite a few of you are aware of. But anybody that isn't, it's an app-based survey tool, so you can use a tablet or a smartphone, and you can download the survey to the smartphone. And I think one of the best parts about it is you can use it without being connected to the internet. It stores the data on your phone, and then you can upload it when you've got data connectivity. So the survey was designed using that tool, and we deployed it through 3 enumerators in Malawi. So I designed it over here in Scotland, and then we sent it over to them to do the surveys. And we did we targeted 3 areas. So it was an urban, peri-urban, and rural setting. The urban and peri-urban were in Lilongwe in Malawi, the capital city, and the rural area was in a very, very rural off-grid setting. So that's a bit of background. The survey itself took about 15 to 20 minutes. We were trying to make it as quick as possible, really, to try and get as many surveys done in a short period of time on quite a limited budget. So most of the questions were multiple choice, and it was actually quite successful. We got really quite a dense data set. So the survey itself was in 3 parts. The first part was kind of standard survey methodology, where you get general information about the participant and their household, and a little bit about the electricity supply was added into that bit. The second part was a bit more about how people cook. So which is the main household cook in the household? If there's anybody else, how much of the cooking do they also do? And a few bits of general information about which cooking devices they own, which ones they use for heating water, because that can be quite a large amount of energy used on using the same devices to heat water, and the fuel used, how much fuel they buy each time they buy fuel, how often they buy that amount of fuel, and how much is spent on that fuel each time. So that was used to try and get an idea of not only how much is spent per month on energy in their house, but also in what quantities the fuel is being bought. Because, for example, in Malawi, the LPG industry is very underdeveloped, so you can only buy fuel in like very large quantities all at once, whereas charcoal you can buy on a daily basis. So gathering that information as well as how much is spent is actually really important. And then the third part was the bit that I want to speak mostly about was the indicative cooking diary. I called it the indicative cooking diary. So if you can scroll down just a little bit, John. This table kind of shows what questions were being asked in the diary. And what we did was we tried to gather what would be cooked, how it would be cooked for a typical weekday and a typical weekend day. So this wasn't actually recording people doing the cooking. This was simply asking them what they would usually cook on each of these day types. And I chose to do 2 different day types because I thought there would be quite a big difference potentially between what people cooked on a working day and what they would cook on a non-working day. As it happened, there wasn't actually a massive difference. And perhaps it would have been better in hindsight to phrase it as a working day and a non-working day, for example, rather than a weekday and a weekend day, considering that people actually work on the weekends sometimes. And then as the survey went, I've only shown for one meal, but essentially we asked for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack. The questions started with the number of people that were being cooked for that meal. So for breakfast, we'd say, how many people do you cook breakfast for on a normal weekday? And then in each meal, we would ask for whether a hot drink was cooked, in inverted commas, whether any water was heated, essentially. And also 3 dishes that were included in that meal. So for a hot drink, we would first ask what drink was cooked, which was only really 3 options: tea, water, or coffee. And then for that drink, which device would be used. And these devices were accompanied by a sheet which showed pictures of the devices to make sure that the correct device was being selected. And then for the actual foods that were being cooked, or the dishes, we had which food was being cooked, the cooking method that was being used to cook that food, and the device used to cook that food. So there's 3 parts to the dish side, and then each meal was constituted of potentially 3 dishes. So for example, for breakfast, we would know how many people were cooked for, a hot drink if there was one for that meal, and then 3 dishes to go along with that meal. And that basically follows the same template as the cooking diaries do, assuming that most meals are constituted of 3 dishes or less. And as I said before, all of these options were multiple choice, which made it an awful lot easier to analyze the data at the end. One of the issues with analyzing cooking diaries data not only is that it's all mostly paper-based, but also it's all handwritten, or they're all free entry. So you have to analyze what they're actually cooking. Whereas what we did was we chose the most common dishes on the advice of the enumerators, and there was actually very few other dishes that needed to be checked. And the same with the cooking methods. We gave quite a few options for the cooking methods. As it happened, actually only very few options were actually selected. And also the devices. This was a list of all of the devices we could possibly think of that people might use. And as it happens, it was actually, again, a very limited number of devices that were used. If you just scroll down again, John, this is an example of the device information sheet that we gave on the next page. So this is all the different devices with pictures to make sure people would understand exactly what they were selecting in the survey. Some interesting ones from Malawi were these different devices for heating water. There's various different devices used for heating water, not just hot plates, but also like water heating elements literally dunked into the water, pail heaters, which is like a very large kettle. And then some houses also had sort of more modern water heaters installed. If you could go on to the next page, please, John. So I'm just going to give a really quick summary of the results that we got from the surveys to give you an idea of the kind of things that we could gather. Most of the analysis was done by separating the samples between the urban, peri-urban and rural locations. We've got this sort of standard stuff: education, number of rooms, construction of the household, and a little bit on the electricity supply. That's an area which I think we needed to include more questions on, actually, because it was a little bit unclear. Although they said they had a lot of blackouts, we didn't interrogate that enough to understand what kind of methods or what ways people were mitigating against the fact that there are a lot of blackouts in Malawi. And then obviously the second part was, this is a general cooking information, just literally asking people which devices do you use for cooking, or which devices do you own. And as you can see, most of the rural participants were using firewood, peri-urban areas using charcoal and electricity, and in urban areas using mostly electricity with a little bit of charcoal and a little bit of LPG. And then a little bit about the other devices that they own for cooking. So there's a lot of kettles, for example, were the most popular one, and a few rice cookers and microwaves. And if you go down onto the next slide, the next page. Well, I've included this because I think it's really important when we're designing these surveys to try and compare the data that we've got with data that's already available. So although the data that we want to collect is not necessarily already available, I think it's good to collect what's already there as well to compare it with. So I designed the survey so it was comparable with the national survey data that Malawi already collects on the cooking devices, and also a few other studies. And what it allows is this really kind of detailed picture of all the different surveys and what devices they collected were being used in different areas. And if you look all the way down the chart, you can see how from the most urban locations, electricity dominates. Slowly it transitions through charcoal in the sort of peri-urban, and then as you get to the bottom in the rural settings, it's dominated by firewood. It's just quite an interesting sort of complex picture that you get, where it's not binary. It's not, urban areas they cook with electricity and peri-urban areas they only cook with charcoal. It really depends on exactly which household you're selecting in those particular locations. And then a little bit further down, we've got a little bit of information. This was from just asking people how much they spend on each fuel. When this is a monthly per capita spend, so obviously household sizes vary quite a lot. So we've made it per capita energy expenditure. And I think the biggest message here is, although in urban areas a lot of people cook with electricity, they also spend a very, very wide range of different amounts of money on cooking with electricity, and the same for the other fuels as well, which makes this data incredibly hard to actually make detailed comparisons between, because you can see that the spread of the data points is very, very wide. And then for that reason, the table at the very bottom of that page, this is really very indicative because of the amount of variation. But what the survey allowed us to do was compare the energy expenditure per month with which devices they use. So in the urban area, for example, the average expenditure was 7,000 kwacha per month on cooking fuels, and electricity only was 6,500. Electricity with charcoal was 7,500. If they used electricity and LPG was 8,000. I must say that these samples are very, very small, but if you use this similar survey technique with a very large sample, you could do these comparisons and find statistically significant differences potentially. And then finally, I'll just go over, possibly more importantly, what we got from the indicative cooking diaries. So one of the main findings was that although we had a long list of different dishes that the participants could select that they cook, 90% of the dishes that they cooked came from a list of just 10 different options. So I think we gave about 20 different options, but 90% of the dishes in Malawi were cooked, came from a list of 10, which are shown on the left. So breakfast was basically tea and coffee with porridge, potatoes, or eggs, and then lunch and dinner were the same set of 6 options. So it was nsima or rice, beans, vegetables, fish, eggs, and meat or poultry. And then again, there was not very much variation in the amount of different cooking methods used, which is just a little bit further down the page. So almost every meal or dish was cooked through boiling. A very, very small number were cooked from frying, or either deep frying or shallow frying, an even smaller number, which is quite interesting, particularly for potentially using EPCs, because the majority of those are also through boiling, what you can do with an EPC. And then a bit further down, we've got what the sort of more detailed kind of analysis that you could do with the cooking diaries information, the indicative cooking diaries information. So you could compare how many dishes were cooked on each day or for each meal between weekends and weekdays. So for example, breakfasts in each of the 3 areas were fairly similar, although you can see that urban areas cooked fewer breakfasts. And then lunch and dinner also, there was quite a big difference between urban and peri-urban areas and rural areas. So urban and peri-urban areas actually cooking less lunches and dinners compared with rural areas. And then even further, you could look at not just meals but dishes that people were cooking. And this is it can get a little bit difficult to explain what these actually mean because it's a lot of percentages in one table. But essentially, this is out of, for example, for breakfasts, out of all breakfasts, how many was there tea and coffee cooked, or for how many of those was porridge cooked, or for how many of those were potatoes cooked, and so on. So you can see for which meals, which dishes are the most common. I mean, I won't go into the detail of that because it gets a bit too complicated, but there'll be a report with all this information on it a bit later in the year. And then onto the next page, we have not just which dishes are used, but which devices are used to cook those dishes. Again, the sample sizes are quite small, so this is kind of just indicative information, really, just to demonstrate the ability of this survey to gather this kind of information. But as you can see, it's kind of, you can see a diagonal line of sort of green going across most of these charts, which sort of shows that in rural areas almost everything is still cooked with firewood on 3-stone fires. In peri-urban areas, it sort of mixes between electricity, charcoal, and firewood. And then when you get up to the urban ones, the green is further to the right, indicating they use more modern energy cooking devices. And then finally, I think this is possibly one of the best findings that we had from the survey, from the data from the survey, was you could compare which devices people own and which devices they cook on. So if somebody owns, let's say, an electric hot plate and owns a charcoal stove, then you can compare whether they choose to use charcoal or electricity more often. And as you can see, basically the device which is being used the least when they have the option to use another device is charcoal. So low numbers in this table indicate that they had the option to use this device or another one, and they chose not to use it. So there's a good reason why the firewood is very, very high, is because in most places the firewood was used in rural areas and they didn't have an opportunity to use any other device. And in the charcoal and a lot of people use charcoal and electricity together, but most of the low percentages are for charcoal. So people are actually preferring to use electricity, even though there's a lot of blackouts in Malawi. So that's a quick summary of the kind of data that we could get and what questions we were asking. And I'd be interested to know what other people think about this. I think that the main potential for this survey is to do it on a bigger scale, obviously, to find out this data in a more statistically significant sample, but also there's the potential to combine what people cook and how they cook it with a number for the amount of energy is used to cook it. And then you could actually compare cooking costs using different fuels. So you have a menu for Malawi, which indicates what people cook and how they cook it, but then you could change the devices that they use to find out what effect that would have on the amount of energy that they use and the amount of money they spend. And I've been chatting to John a little bit about how maybe we'd be able to do this through using workshops with local cooks actually cooking the dishes on the different devices and measuring their energy consumption, and then combining that with this data. But at the moment, because of COVID, we can't actually do this in Malawi, but I'm looking forward to doing something like that in the future, potentially. So I hope that was clear. I realise I've just talked furiously for about 20 minutes, but I hope everybody understood what I was talking about and it was useful.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks so much, Will. That was a really good overview of the work that you carried out. And I totally agree. I think the real value of this method is that you can reach many more people much more quickly than you can with something like a full cooking diary study. I think obviously there are strengths and weaknesses to each methodology. The cooking diary study gives you that kind of user experience, the kind of action research as well, but it's a lot of effort to set up a cooking diary study, and something like this can be relatively easily deployed, and you can get a much more representative picture of the population as a whole. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I think everyone has the document themselves, so unless we want to refer to a particular page, then I'll start sharing again. Shall we open the floor for questions?
Go ahead. Yep. Anyone ask anything? Go ahead.
Thanks for that, Will. That's very interesting. I was just wondering how the data is kind of stored, and for example, lots of people are working in lots of different countries. They could be collecting the same sets of data and bringing it back into some kind of mega database. I don't know if that's something people are looking at already. Maybe it's happening already. But I just wondered if there's any thoughts on that.
Well, so Kobo, what happens with it is it all gets uploaded back to where the survey was deployed from. So we deployed this survey in Malawi, and then all the enumerators, it all came back into a central spreadsheet where all the data is represented. I can actually probably show that to you if you're not familiar. I can't actually because I can't share my screen. But basically, it all comes back to a spreadsheet which has all the questions along the top and all the respondents along the in the columns, which means that it's all centralized. And if you deployed the same exact survey in different countries, then they could actually all come into the same spreadsheet potentially. And if the spreadsheets were slightly different, then you could easily try and sort of translate them into the same spreadsheet by, making gaps where questions were slightly different. That's the beauty of using Kobo. Yeah. Yeah,
just to add to that, so that is something that we have already done with a slightly different questionnaire. So Nigel from Gamos, who's on the line here, had designed the choice modeling survey, which has now been implemented in, I think it's at least 6, if not 7 countries with a comparable questionnaire. The work that we did before MECS has kind of fed into the same data set. So Nigel now has in the cloud and on his desktop a set of data of comparable responses of 200 households, I think, from each of those countries. So he's been able to do some really interesting analysis comparing responses between countries and across the entire data set. Nigel, did you want to mention anything more about what you've been able to learn from using Kobo as a platform that can get you data from a large amount of people very relatively quickly?
I mean, I think Will has explained Kobo. I mean, it's just it's an Android-based system that's free and brilliant. So I don't think I can add much more on that. I think the only you mentioned that we've squashed together data from the discrete choice experiment surveys in 6 countries, and I mean, one of the challenges, and Will mentioned this, is that when you do different surveys in different countries, you will have to tailor it a little bit to match whatever's going on in the country. So, the different fuels that are available, the different devices that people are using that you can get on the market, and so on. So there's always a little bit of, we had the holy grail is that you just set up a template and run it across lots of countries. It never happens. So there's always a bit of faffing around to be done to try and squash data from different countries into a single data set. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just a bit of a nuisance. So yeah, I mean, we're very much hoping. I think Elisa's just about to do the surveys that she mentioned. So she'll be using similar templates, and I think as soon as that data is available, hopefully she'll get in touch and we'll see how that can be made compatible with the existing data sets we've got. And this is going to go on in all the other countries that MECS is working in.
Yeah, I can kind of see two routes for how we might proceed with this survey. One route is that we polish it up a bit more and then we implement it as a separate survey in other countries and with more households in Malawi. Another route is that we could potentially combine it in some way with the discrete choice modeling survey, which is in itself a household survey that could have both sets of data collected at the same time. Of course, it then become a longer survey, so there's obviously issues there, but I imagine the descriptor data at the start is identical or very similar for both of them. And then the cooking practices stuff could be one section that then leads into the discrete choice modeling part itself and the other things that are also embedded in there. One other way that we're using Kobo, I think Anna has unmuted her mic, so I'd like to pass over to her because she is combining the cooking diaries itself with Kobo. Anna, did you want to just say a bit about how that's going in Tanzania?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I wanted to just make a comment. Thank you very much, Will, for that presentation and the report. Yeah, so I'm running some full cooking diaries surveys in Tanzania at the moment on a big trial of EPCs in rural communities. And actually, we're doing 2 communities and a total of about 30 participants in the full cooking diaries. But there are another 67 participants in other communities. So I was actually thinking that this would be really interesting to combine with the full cooking diaries for 2 reasons. Firstly, to compare the results to see if they're both the same. Like that would be really, really interesting. And but secondly, just to widen, and then if the results are the same, to widen, to increase the amount of data we're getting, basically, because obviously, and why this is so useful, like we're constrained with the full cooking diaries method, we're constrained by how much effort it is, and that's why this method is important. But what we could do is combine it to have a small kind of full cooking diary situation, like my 30 households in 2 locations in Tanzania, but also be covering more households, which we would do, but it's just like the vast amount of data that comes through is just kind of completely crazy for the full diary. So yeah, I'd be interested in trying to run them alongside and increasing our confidence in the full cooking diaries results, and also with this indicative cooking diaries by a comparison.
Yeah, I
can see another way that.
Sorry, John.
Sorry,
I was just going to say that's one of the things that we haven't done with this data, is that we don't have any way of validating it against anything else, because no other data exists really for what people cook in Malawi. So there would definitely be a lot of usefulness in actually doing the full cooking diaries, which basically definitely records exactly what people are cooking, and comparing it with something like this to work out whether it's actually really recording what people do or not.
Well, let's maybe discuss after this, but I mean, we could adapt this so that it looks like, because like for example, in the Tanzania cooking diaries, I got rid of like how they're cooking, like frying and stuff. It's contained slightly differently. But this could be adapted to look like the Tanzanian full cooking diaries that is going on there, and then I could see if the enumerators might be able to run it on the households that they're already doing the full ones on. I don't know. I'd need to think that through a little bit, but yeah, we should discuss if that would be interesting.
Yeah, no, it sounds good.
Yeah, I was just going to say this could be a really useful method for extending the findings from your cooking diary study on mini-grids. For example, if PowerGen were interested in trialing EPCs on a mini grid on the other side of Tanzania or in Kenya, for example. They may want to say, well, people are eating different things. We don't know whether they're the data that we got from the studies that we did at the moment are going to be how they're going to relate to this particular community. So you could, as part of a feasibility study, send out someone with a Kobo tablet and ask 100 households in that community, and you get an indicative menu and see how similar that is to the menu that was recorded during the detailed cooking diary studies.
Yeah, well, I mean, during the detailed cooking diary study, we do run a focus group to uncover the menu, and then those menu choices are kind of fed back in. But yeah, I agree that it could also be kind of a predictor.
The other kind of thing I wanted to bring up was around the cooking processes. So I find it very surprising that households are not doing very much frying at all. So I want to know whether the way the survey was set up, was it mutually exclusive on cooking processes, i.e. if you said it was a boiling dish, then it couldn't be a frying dish, it's just one or the other. And even if it was not, then is the potential that people may have just picked the dominant process. For example, a stew is, in some cultures, it's mainly boiling and not much frying at all. In other cultures, it's more frying. Like in Kenya, often a stew is described as a wet fry. So you have a very low amount of liquid, and you do shallow frying at some point, and you put in tomatoes, and then it becomes a bit more wet, as the term is. So I wondered whether are those processes that you've collected there really a fair reflection on what the actual cooking process that's being used is. I mean, obviously you mentioned that you're going to do more practical trials when you're able to, but just your feeling at the moment, do you think that is a fair reflection of Malawian cuisine? It is a lot of boiling?
Very possibly not, to be honest. They could only choose one cooking process for each dish. And the dishes, like you say, we didn't give the options for things like foods which dishes that combined a lot of different foods. So like a stew, which has lots of different ingredients. It doesn't really accurately capture that at the moment, which is partially why I haven't really concentrated too much on the cooking processes in the report, because I was a little bit worried about that. Certainly people do fry foods, and I would hazard a guess that we're not collecting enough of the frying in the survey, but yeah, definitely I think it's a very interesting point actually, how to gather that information, and whether to look at it. I mean, I've called them dishes, but really they're almost like ingredients, and looking at them more as dishes, or in some way trying to combine different ingredients and what's included would be important, I think, going further.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think we're kind of at a similar, well, maybe kind of where you were at, say, 4 or 5 months ago in Uganda and Ethiopia at the moment, and Myanmar as well, in that we're now trying to uncover what it is that people are eating and try and map out the menu. And we originally thought about starting with a survey like this, but we've kind of thought that it makes a bit more sense, especially given that doing a survey is more difficult at the moment. It might make more sense to go with the practical trials first. And so the practical trials, obviously, you can't do in the way that we had discussed before in doing a big event, because gatherings are clearly not going to happen for some time. But there are some kind of practical trials that you can do at home. You know, everyone cooks at home. Well, most people cook at home, or someone in their household cooks at home every day. So getting the researchers that are involved in the project to experiment with the different foods that they're cooking, and to write down those recipes and experiment with which devices can cook them and how much energy they're using as a starting point, to then be able to group together those dishes and to see them as a complete recipe, if you will, as opposed to the ingredient. I think that is a key issue that really needs to be drawn out before going and before setting up to set up the survey, so that you really know what each of those categories that you've got in there means. When someone says they're cooking a chicken, it can mean many things. They can deep fry that chicken, they can roast that chicken, they can boil that chicken. and really being able to understand what the category is that people are ticking on that form, I think will really help to make those results clearer.
So just to jump in with the experience that we had in Tanzania, because John and Nigel and I had a big discussion about this when we were in the setting up stage of the full cooking diaries there, probably about 2 or 3 months ago. We ran a focus group with the participants to essentially crowdsource what is the recipe that you guys are using, what are the steps. Firstly, asking them what do you usually cook, and so they'd say like fish stew. And then we get them to describe the steps that they use to do that fish stew. And so we would capture that it was kind of frying and boiling at different amounts of time with different ingredients. And obviously it's coming from 15 cooks rather than 1. But that's kind of okay because you get some kind of average agreement in between everybody. And then on our Kobo form, they could select, they didn't just select fish and then boiling, they would select fish stew or fried fish as 2 different things. And we have the information like written down somewhere that what each of those dishes means in terms of processes, so it can kind of be retrofitted back in. So that's kind of the approach that we went to with that issue.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good way of doing it, actually.
So Anna, I'd be interested to know how much consensus you got. I mean, do people cook fish stew in the same way, or is there an enormous argument about who makes the best fish stew?
I don't think anyone got into who was better, but they did seem to reach a consensus. I mean, this was all occurring in Swahili, which unfortunately I couldn't follow all of it, but they did seem to reach consensus. So the people who were leading the focus group were kind of gathering in the information from everyone, and so a lady would say, "Oh no, I do it like this," or "I do it like this." But like in general, people do cook have roughly the same steps. So maybe they put different things in, like they wouldn't put, I don't know, whatever spices or garlic in, but they would start with some base that they would fry and then move on. So it's a very approximate, right, way of understanding what that dish is, but at least it tells us, it doesn't mean that you have the issue of, oh no, they've clipped chicken and they've boiled it, and that's all, that's the kind of end of the information. Whereas if you know that a common dish, I mean, also it helped that our communities were quite homogenous, you know, they're very tight. So one of them was is on an island in Lake Victoria, and the other one is a small community on the mainland. And so they do kind of have their own like cooking culture and cooking menu. So yeah.
I just think it's fascinating from what Will was saying, that was it 90% of meals comprise the top 6 ingredients or something, which represents a lack of variety in the diet. You know, I'm not saying it's a poor diet, I'm just saying people seem to cook the same things, and people have said to this that you get a fixed menu, maybe a week's menu, and you just eat the same foods again and again and again, which is I mean, it's fascinating, because if that is the case, then it opens up opportunities for how to address all the stuff that MECS is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, actually, funnily enough, Nigel, so when we did the survey originally, I asked for 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day, and very quickly got rid of the second weekday because people were saying, "Why are you asking me the question? I eat the same thing every single day." So
yeah, really, that's really interesting.
Yeah, we were just like, they just didn't want to answer the second weekday.
Yeah, we need some West Africans on this call.
Well, was that the same with both the rural and the urban participants?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was exactly the same. Yeah, it was. I was kind of shocked, actually. It was really surprising.
Hi. Well, thanks for the presentation. It's really interesting. I'm just wondering, from the categories of the ingredients, how much scope is there for, I mean, when people said they ate the same thing every day, was it that they ate vegetables and rice or shima every day, or was it that the vegetables had a huge variety within them? So, you know, one day was green vegetables, the next day was beetroot or a root veg. And similarly with beans, was it a wide variety of beans, or was it predominantly kind of the same bean being cooked on a regular basis?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question, because we didn't give separate options, because I mean, really, otherwise we'd have had sort of hundreds and thousands of options in the survey. It would have been a bit difficult to gather, but so I can't honestly tell. I imagine there would be a lot of variety, and certainly with the vegetables changing. I can't imagine everybody's eating exactly the same vegetable every day, but broadly speaking, they were the same in terms of like being ensima and vegetables and something else pretty much every day. Yeah.
I just wanted to share my screen very quickly. Sorry, do you want to go first, Lisa? Is that you, Lisa?
Elsie. Hello?
Sorry, Elsie, you go.
I just wanted to say, I think the heterogeneity that Anna mentioned is very important, because I guess this shifts quite dramatically from region to region. If you're dealing with a very tight-knit community, it's likely that they cook the same things the same way, because then there's a local culture that everyone adheres to. But then if you move to another region, you'll find the same vegetable fried in one part of the country, but it's boiled in another part of the country, or it's cooked on charcoal, then fried on a pan. You know, like you'd find variations depending on how heterogeneous the communities are. And I think then such a study would be quite challenging to do in an urban where you have these different communities in a melting pot and they all adopt different ways of cooking the same things. Just a challenge I'm throwing out there. I'm curious to see how we can.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, Elsie, because I mean the menus between the two communities we had in that we're doing this in Tanzania are different. So I changed it. Following the focus group with the second community, they added more. They added different dishes, so different recipes.
Just to chime in there, I think on that exact point, then what Jacob and Maren and I have been discussing is about how we can categorize foods, because there are really only so many ways that you can cook food. Each context that we study, we are learning about new ways, but ultimately we will get to the point where we have learned all the ways that you can possibly cook all the different foods. Jacob runs a takeaway food business that features different chefs each month. And so he has experience with a huge range of different cuisines from around the world. And what he was telling me the other day is that he's learned that actually many of the things are just the same. Maybe they have a slightly different ingredient in them, and maybe you add a different spice at a different point, but the cooking processes largely are the same. They're just done at different times in different orders. So what we've been working towards is creating a typology of foods. So we got this idea from Ame, who may or may not still be on the call here, who had put together in his report for the Challenge Fund project that IDE did, a typology of Khmer food in Cambodia. So he's grouped the different dishes by the predominant cooking process that is used for them. So I really think that this way of grouping the dishes by cooking process, and also perhaps some other critical factors like whether it's stirred or how long the cooking process is, or each process is really key to understanding how the food in one particular place is prepared and how those results transfer to other places as well. So this is something that we are exploring. I mean, we've got not really got time to open this up now in the last few minutes of the call, but potentially something we could come back to on another call once we've developed it more. So I did want to kind of try and wrap things up because we've only got 3 minutes left. So I wanted to pass back to Will just to see whether he had any final words, and then I will ask my usual final question of the session, which is, what should we talk about in the next session? Which field method would we like to learn more about? So back to Will just briefly, and then please get thinking so you've got your answers ready. Over to you, Will.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, I don't have anything particular to wrap up with, only that obviously this is still up for debate, this kind of methodology, and I'd really be interested to speak to anybody that has any input on trying to change it or wants to use it in their own country. I mean, having done it, having gone through it and analysed all the data, I'd be keen to help other people as well, trying to streamline the process and make the data analysis a bit more simple. But yeah, please do get in touch, and thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Will, for taking the time to prepare the handout and for sharing your work with us today. I think it's without doubt that this is a really useful method, and I think together we can help to sharpen it and to apply it in more places. So thank you very much on behalf of the group. Can I ask, does anyone have a topic that they would like to volunteer for next session in a fortnight's time? Silent. It doesn't have to be necessarily something that you know something about. It can be something that you want to know something about. Okay, well, in the lack of other responses, then maybe I'll put a few propositions to the group. On my list for things I would like to know more about or like to explore further with the group are kitchen laboratory techniques. So being able to, these kind of practical explorations, recording energy and understanding where energy is used, categorizing dishes, etc. There's also the typologies of food, which is kind of linked to that as well. Phone surveys. I've got a really interesting guide on how to do phone surveys effectively, produced by 60 decibels that I could share. It's not something I have implemented myself in the past, though, so it's not something I can share my personal experience with. And then finally, the concept of living labs, which links to kitchen laboratory. It's the idea of using real spaces and real people as the experimenters, as opposed to doing it in a dedicated room with people in white coats pressing buttons. Are any of those of interest to people, or has anyone since then thought of an alternative suggestion they would like to discuss next time? Okay, the silence is quite deafening.
John, I'm happy to talk about any of those things. I think they're all very interesting to me.
Okay. Does anyone want to express a preference? Or if not, then I might give Will the choice of what we should look at next fortnight. Yeah. Anybody else? If you're talking now, you are muted, by the way. So please either unmute or put in the chat. Okay, I can conclude that nobody has got anything to say, and Will, I'm afraid you have to make the choice as to what we'll focus on in a couple of weeks.
Well, I guess the first two things that you spoke about are probably most relevant to what we just talked about. It leads on quite well, the typology of foods. And I mean, I don't know if all three of those things you probably couldn't fit them all into a call, but certainly the first two that you mentioned lead on quite well from what I just discussed, or what we just discussed.
Okay, so there's the kitchen laboratory and the typology of foods.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'll have a talk with Ame, and I might see whether he would be willing to share how he put together his typology. And then I'll also talk with Jacob and Merrin and see what we might be able to share from what we've been doing on developing typologies. And also the other alternative is kitchen laboratories, which we've also been talking quite a bit about. So maybe I'll have a chat with that group and see what we can share next time. So thank you also to Matt for diligently taking notes. Hopefully you did actually take them, but anything you've written down will be better than having nothing. So please do send to me by email, and I'll circulate to the group afterwards. I'll also share the details of the field methods spreadsheet I showed earlier, and send a link to a shared file space where we can start putting documents relating to different field methods in there. So thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you once again to Will. I really enjoyed the session today and the discussion afterwards. So thank you to everyone for participating. See you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, John. Thanks,
Bye.
Will. See you later, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.